Hello and welcome. My name is Shelby Cook, head curator and editor-in-chief at Film East, and today I'm joined by my fellow programmers Neve Brooke, Will Schofield, and Ishnor to discuss Luca Guadagnino's queer coming-of-age romance, Call Me By Your Name. This segment is part of Film East, a Norwich film programming group. In Luca Guadagnino's self-described Desire trilogy, the idea of love and lust are manifested in a variety of forms. The trilogy, which consists of 2009's I Am Love, 2015's A Bigger Splash, and 2017's Call Me By Your Name, uses the backdrop of the Italian countryside to explore the lives of wealthy foreigners who struggle with understanding what they desire and why. While the films are all different in their main storylines, they do share many commonalities. Each film, draped in the gorgeous warmth of the Italian summertime, explores how yearning can have both transformative and damaging consequences, as desire is equal parts destruction and birth. For this podcast, we will discuss the final installment of Guadagnino's trilogy, Call Me By Your Name, exploring how the film evokes the visceral sensation of a romantic summer love affair. The film, set in northern Italy in 1983, chronicles the romantic relationship between a 17-year-old Elio, played by Timothée Chalamet in his breakout role, and Oliver, a 24-year-old graduate student assistant to Elio's father. The film functions as a coming-of-age story and embraces themes of gay romance, sexual discovery and desire, and connection to identity and self. So without further ado, enjoy our discussion. Okay, so we're going to start this discussion on Call Me By Your Name. This is one of my favorite films. It's also my sad girl favorite film. I watch this movie when I want to cry because it's so beautiful and it just is so profound to me. But what does everyone else think about Call Me By Your Name in terms of, is this your first time seeing it? Have you seen it before? Have you watched it 20 million times like I have?
I'd seen it once before this time, and I had the same feeling I had the first time, and I just remember it being such a slow burn. Like it really just takes its time, and I really like that about it, because I don't like many films that do that, but because of the subject matter, you don't fall in love quickly. It can take a really long time to get to know someone before you're even like, oh, like I think that's really important, because not everyone's like soulmates straight away. You have to get to know them, and I love that about that. And I also, that final scene by the phone, it gets you every time. I think that's what makes it, that it's like that crux at the end. I love it. I think it's a really good film.
It was my first time watching it, and I completely agree about the slow burn angle. I really liked the first half, and then for me it kind of reached a point where it almost slow burned out a bit. Like I felt there was very little kind of, not development of their relationship exactly, but it felt like it had reached a point where it established what was going on, and then was kind of just like floating towards the next plot point, which again I think works for the ideas you were talking about, the slow burn of relationships and how it's not a kind of constant thing, and almost as a kind of wider comment on like the feeling of like the holiday in Italy, summertime kind of time doesn't really exist. But while that works for kind of the thematic purposes, for me as just like almost a casual viewer, it got a little bit sluggish at certain points.
I've watched it before, and I really like this movie. I watched it again yesterday, but I mean, my initial thoughts when I watched it for the first time was that it's so beautiful to look at, right? That it's got a good countryside, it's got good shots, good looking actors, and it is very pretty, right? But then there is some intensity, there's some passion to their romance that they are having. So that just affects me every time I watch it. So I always revisit the speech of the father. I always revisit when he was sitting in front of the fireplace. So those are one of my favorite scenes, and I always visit them because of the intensity. And I feel that I felt emotionally close to the film when the when I could see that intensity on screen. Otherwise, for me, it's like, hey, it's a beautiful film. It's a holiday film, as Will said. Um, yeah, but I like it though.
And I think that's why I'm so drawn to this film, is because it's not just a pretty film just to be pretty.
Yeah.
I think Guadagnino does a brilliant, amazing job of using the beauty of it to communicate this sort of lust and this feeling. So Call Me By Your Name is the last film in his Desire trilogy, which is 3 films all about exploring love and passion and burning desire for people. And I think with this film, compared to the other ones, there's this really beautiful use of touch and light that just really communicates this sort of visceral sensation of wanting to be in love with someone. And I don't fully think I understand how he does it, but I watched this video essay once and they were talking about touch. And there was a scene when Oliver first comes to the house and he's walking down the steps and he just grazes his hand across the wall to feel the texture of the wall. And it's this very small moment, you probably won't even notice it, but it's just sort of that subconscious thing of that feeling of just grazing your hand and having that feeling of grazing your hand against someone's body as well. And that feeling of touch, which I think is so prominent in this film, that really helps to communicate this desire that these two have for each other without, because they obviously the first part of the movie, their desires never communicated. They never discussed it, but you can feel it in the way that the film is made and the way that the direction is happening. Does anyone else have anything to discuss on that topic?
I agree that the atmosphere was like absolutely incredible. I think it helps that it's a very, very bright, sunny period in Britain right now when I was watching it. So I was like, wow, it's almost like I can feel the heat. And I look at the temperature, and it's like, oh yeah. But it was the visuals of it, the colors, the sunlight bouncing off the white Italian vistas and walls and stuff. It really captures I think I said a kind of a almost timelessness sense. It so much more than kind of any statement about time or where it's, if they set in like a specific chronological place, which they kind of do at the beginning, but I'm struggling here, sorry.
Well, and I think that the setting of it being in Italy in the summer and it being hot, and it's sort of, we'll touch on this in our next one, our next episode of Do the Right Thing, and that sort of sensation of heat. Whereas in Do the Right Thing, the heat is used more of a negative thing to create these sort of negative emotions. Whereas I think in this one, the sun beating down on the characters, at one point, Elio and Oliver, Elio's out sunbathing and Oliver's in the pool, and that the sun hitting his body is just sort of this like comparison between the heat and thirst and lust for someone. And the visceral feeling of what love is. It feels warm, it feels like sunshine. And it sort of communicates this fiery passion that it's building between the two characters. And I think that is, at its core, really what helps to build this romance, because there isn't much communicated between the two characters. They spend a lot of time separated from each other. And I think it's that separation when you so dearly want to touch that is just, it's like electric.
I think that's really interesting, because a lot of the most explicit scenes between the two of them are not in the sunlight. Like when they're in bed together, it's in the early hours of the morning and they're covered in shadows, and the whole peach scene is like that, and many of their sexual interactions and stuff do take place at night and undercover. What do you think that's about? Like, does that fit into that metaphor?
Well,
do you think?
I'm wondering, since you said that, I'm wondering if perhaps that's a way of communicating that I have a very special relationship with this film where I first saw it when I was madly in love with this man. And I felt like I was Elio and he was Oliver, and I was so obsessed with him. And obviously throughout the course of our relationship, it didn't work out, and it sort of petered out, where it was this, it felt like how this movie feels. It was like this electric sensation between the two of us. Like we both kind of felt it, but neither one of us was saying anything. And I think those scenes where it goes into night is when you begin to have that realization that perhaps the buildup to the desire was more exciting than the actual desire of it. So maybe it happens at night because, nothing ever happened with this guy, but it was just the idea of the electric between us and that sort of unspeakable palpability. But then, when that was sort of communicated and that did happen, it wasn't as exciting as how it felt. So maybe the nighttime sequences are more of being in the shadow of post-love and having to come to the realization that's not as exciting as perhaps what you envisioned it to be.
I interpreted that differently, because isn't this set in the 80s, if I'm correct?
Yeah.
Back in the 80s, being gay wasn't as accepted, and that's a big theme in the film. So the shadows and the darkness is the hidden desire. It's that time that the sunlight isn't on them, they're by themselves, and though they're in the darkness, they get to actually be themselves, and in the sunlight they have to be this projection of who society expects them to be. They can only truly be themselves in the darkness, which sounded a little bit dramatic.
Yeah,
but,
well,
and
I think that's especially with Oliver, that's what what he's grappling with, is when they wake up the morning after and it's the daytime. Oliver's very distant and he feels uncomfortable with Elio being in his bed. So when that daylight does come back, it's like you have to hide yourself again.
Highlights the duality of God. That's a big word. I'm sorry. I shot myself then.
So we kind of mentioned the peach scene. We at Film East recently published a book about the use of food on film. It's called Eating the Screen, and it can be found at film-east.com/eating-the-screen. And in that book, we discuss how the use of food can be used to communicate different metaphors and different symbolisms in film and TV. And I think obviously this peach and a really Italian produce plays a really big part in this film. I'm going to leave it up to everyone else to interpret. I know what my interpretation of the peach is, but does anyone have any opinions on the peach? It doesn't necessarily need to be related to the scene where it happens. Obviously, this is the infamous Why Call Me By Your Name is so well known. It's this infamous peach scene.
I don't know if I'm interpreting it wrong. The sound design on that scene makes me sick. Like, it's so visceral. When I watch him do it, I'm like, it makes me gag. But
when he pulls
the
pit out of the peach, oh, it's horrible. I hate that noise.
I don't like it. It's I really have to mentally prepare myself to watch that scene. But I interpret it as the desperate measures one would go to be themselves in secret. Like, you feel so repressed, and after he does the scene and he cries because he's so ashamed and so embarrassed, and he's like, I'm sick, I'm not well, and he's not. He just wants to be himself, and he can't, because he's 17, he's young in this film, and it's like he just can't compute how to be himself, and he's figuring things out. I don't think it's ever explicitly mentioned whether he's bisexual or if he's gay, and I think that's a really interesting way they've done it, because you don't need to put a label on your sexuality, you can just be you. And I think after he does that, he's kind of just so shocked at what he's done, and I think he's just, it's a big metaphor of discovering who you are and what you're into, really.
And there's also a scene earlier in the film where he's reaching at the peach trees and he pulls a peach down. So that could relate back to that, where he's kind of grabbing this idea of who he is and sort of starting to formulate that idea about himself. Does anyone else?
I think Neve's point is really interesting, and I think an extension of that is how Oliver reacts to that. Oliver's Army Hammer, right? The older one. Okay.
The other one.
How he comes in, sorry, and he's incredibly playful with it. He starts like toying around with it. He pretends to take a bite, much to the discomfort of Elio, who and it actually results in a bit of tension and a bit of like physical confrontation between the two before a kind of breakdown. And I think it's a good reflection of how much more almost wizened and comfortable Oliver is, and compared to Elio, and Elio reacts almost harshly to that, that his internal struggle would be kind of put down to like silly childish games almost, the way that Oliver's treating like it's just a dumb kid thing. And so I think there's a lot of layers to Elio's reaction to the whole situation almost.
Can I just say, I really don't like Oliver. I think he's horrible.
He is. I think he's horrible.
He's just nasty.
But I think I can, because again, I have such a relationship with this movie where I was literally in that situation when I first saw this movie. And so I always have this like, oh, but he, you know, he's so alluring. There's just something. And I showed my mom this movie a couple years ago, and she was like, I hate Oliver. Like, he's so annoying. He's so nasty. Like, he's just a terrible human being. And I was like, yeah, but it's just something about, he's just has this feeling about him. And it's just like, I hate myself that is, I was Elio in that situation. And I still, every time I watch this movie, I think it's just because I relate so much to Elio of that wanting so badly that you kind of like, oh, you don't see him being like a total jerk, and he's totally taking advantage of this kid. And, you know, again, going back to the peach scene where he comes in, he's like, oh, I'm, you know, oh, you're so nasty. Like, oh, but you want to see something even more nasty. And to Elio, and that was such like a big moment for him where he did this thing that he's insecure about, he doesn't understand, he's uncomfortable with his sexuality, and for Oliver to just come in and just kind of make fun of it just plays back to that bit at the end where he just says, oh yeah, I've been in a relationship with this girl for all this time, we're getting married, and it sort of just like tosses him to the side and doesn't care, where obviously to Elio this is huge for him. And he says, like, in that scene after they fight over the peach, he breaks down and starts crying and says, I don't want you to leave. I'm going to really miss you. Where there might be some missing on Oliver's part, but he didn't have this sort of whole coming of age sort of identity crisis in this situation, where I think Oliver probably has done this before, where he's gone and had affairs with men just because he's insecure about his sexuality, but he wants to be the perfect son and the perfect human, so he marries a woman. So he's probably done this before, so he's been through this situation, whereas Elio, this is the first time this has ever happened to him.
He does say there's a bit where the relationship starts and he kind of rejects Elio, and Elio's like, why? And I don't remember exactly what he says, but I think Oliver basically says, because I know myself and I know where this is going. Yeah. And I don't, so there clearly is a history. It doesn't help that he's played by Armie Hammer, who is currently one of the most cancelled men on the planet, probably. A very bizarre individual.
I also I watched a YouTube video and they said, Armie Hammer, he's meant to be 24 in this. He looks so much older than 24, and it makes it very young. I don't know if that's a deliberate decision to show how much he actually is far more mature than Elio, but it just looks weird. It just looks wrong.
That was a point that I just put into the questions this morning. I was watching the trailers again. There is very clearly a connection between the research that Elio's dad and Oliver are doing on these Roman sculptures and sort of Elio's fascination with Oliver, and the sort of making him, because they go through this, there's this whole scene where they find this missing bit in the water of the statue, and then they come back and they're analyzing it and they're looking at the pictures of the sculpture as a whole or whatever, and the dad is like, oh, he's perfect, he's beautiful, he's this finely crafted thing. And that's sort of, I've always seen a connection between, that's how Armie Hammer's he's supposed to be that Roman sculpture. And that is why he's so beautiful and he's so perfect in his appearance. And sort of Elio, again, makes this sort of, he idealizes the situation, and he makes Oliver into this untouchable, this ancient Roman sculpture that is so beautiful. He's larger than life. He's bigger than man. And he's a god. And that's sort of how there's a connection there as to how Elio is fantasizing about Oliver, when Oliver in reality is just a jerk who's playing this little kid. So we're coming towards the end of our discussion here, but I want to see what everyone thinks in terms of how, obviously the summer romance is a big genre in cinema. There's tons of movies about the summer romance. Where do you think that this film fits into the canon of that? Do you think it is just another run-of-the-mill summer romance movie, or does it have something different about it that makes it more special?
I think so. I don't know how to describe it. I love pulpy popcorn films. You know, we all know I'm a big animation geek. I like those big films. And I think, you know, if you take a summer romance film like Mamma Mia,
yeah,
and then if you take a summer romance film like Call Me by Your Name, there are so many stark differences. And I think it's a level, I don't want to sound really rude, but it's a level of pretense. There's a pretentiousness to it. There's an awareness to it. Every choice in this film is, you know, dictated, like you said, the grazing of the hands, the reaching of the peach. Every shot is meticulously to evoke a feeling or to tell the story, whereas Mamma Mia, they were all drunk. They were just having a blast. They were singing ABBA songs. I think it's a level of artistic quality to this film that puts it into a different level of the summer romance canon. I think to me, it's not one of those films that I'd reach on after a barbecue, but it's one of those films that probably weirdly in the winter I'd want to watch, where I'd want to, sit and just, take it in. It's one of those films.
Yeah. I think another factor of its kind of importance is Lil Nas X, a musician. Yeah, he did a song, Montero, subtitled "Call Me by Your Name," about his own sexual identity. And I think the fact that the film's title is almost kind of recognized as a metaphor for male homosexual relationship within like the public consciousness kind of shows its impact and influence. It's not just kind of a released one year, win some awards and then move on movie. It has really stayed with people. And I think as more movies about these kinds of topics come out, it's going to prove to be fairly influential, both because of its quality and just the fact that it seems to have struck a chord with people.
I feel that for me, it's not at all a run-of-the-mill film, because there is a lot of intensity involved in this film, right? Like even with their love affair, to that last phone call that also happens, the way they take each other's names. There's a lot of passion involved in it. And it's not something that I have to prepare myself to watch this movie. I can't just put it on. And I just can't be like, oh, okay, cool, I'm going to have some fun. So that doesn't happen with this movie, right? I have to prepare myself. And every time when Elio is going after Oliver, I'm like, oh no, please don't go, stop, no.
Yeah, save yourself.
Really sad. Save yourself, don't go. Like every time he's going, my heart's like, okay, wish I could come there and I could stop you. Like, no, don't do that. So it's like all the other summer romances that I've watched, they like seemed a little empty. And this doesn't seem empty. This doesn't, like, even if there is like not a lot of dialogues there, not a lot of conversations around, but there's like you said, Shelby, that there's a lot of touching there and feeling there. So that just gives it a lot of weight, I feel.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I actually will. I Google Call Me by Your Name. I always do that before we start one of these. So in case I need to remember any of the actors or the characters' names, the first thing that comes up is the song. And then down at the bit where like Google like recommends some searches similar, it says people also ask, what does it mean to call me by your name? So obviously this is like something that has been embraced by people of saying like an indiscreet way of saying, oh, I'm gay or I'm queer, which is something that I never knew that this film had such a profound cultural impact. And maybe that is more so because of the song than necessarily the movie. But I know this movie has always had such a profound impact on me, and it's my own fault for falling in love with an older man who reminded me of a Greek sculpture. So that's on me.
I mean, we've all been there.
Yes. Can I add something with regards to Call Me by Your Name? I did not know that that was a cultural impact. So I'm from India, and a lot of folk stories and a lot of folk songs wherein the lovers are singing for each other. So the lovers are going to just like call me by your name because I am yours. So for me, that was, I thought that Call Me by Your Name was like because I want to be called by your name. So that was just a way of showing intimacy, right? So for me, I felt that this is some relation to some sort of love thing which goes on in the world.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Because I mean, obviously from our Western perspective, I never fully understood. I mean, we have to go through this really quickly because we're about to run out of time, but I never really understood why they call each other by their names. And so, because it just kind of feels awkward to me. That's not something I would do. I would not be like, call me Shelby or call yourself Shelby. Like, how weird is that? Like, I don't know. I wouldn't do that. But so, I mean, I guess that adds another layer of understanding to why they do that, because they want to be each other or they want to be connected to each other in a way.
I have one final thing to say, and it's when I think of this film, I think it's a nice tie-up. The Call Me by Your Name, the thing I remember most and regularly gets stuck in my head is when he goes, Elio, 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 the way he says it. And when I think of the film, I hear Elio, 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 Elio. And I think I think that's maybe why it's stuck, because you just hear that, I don't know,
longing,
passion and longing drive. That's just what I think of the film. I think Elio, Elio, Elio. It's very difficult to say.
Hopefully you enjoyed our brief discussion today. If you are interested in learning more about Luca Guadagnino's Desire trilogy, you can read my article on the use of food in the series, titled Culinary Temptations, Italian Cuisine in Luca Guadagnino's Desire trilogy, for Film Days Online. If you liked this episode, we have plenty more episodes just like this one, where we deep dive into a specific film or TV show and look at the themes available within those pieces. You can search Film East Chats anywhere where you download podcasts. If you are interested in contributing to our film and television blog, visit film-east.com/submissions for more information. To learn more about Film East and what we do, you can visit our website, film-east.com, or follow us on any of our social media, @films_east. Again, we've been Film East, a Norwich film programming group. Thanks for listening.